What up, what up? Welcome to Believe in Rams, presented by FanDuel. Erin Coscarelli back with you, joined by the Athletics, Nate Atkins. Nate is a Rams insider, dog dad. He's got his finger on the pulse when it comes to all things happening with the Rams, Stafford. Lots to get into, even though it's June. But first and foremost, the most important question I'm probably going to ask you, have you ever had a spray tan, Nate?
I have not had a spray tan. I need to tan more. That was like the goal from getting out here, was like to be in the sunlight a little bit more. But,
Yeah.
sometimes we're stuck writing and working inside too much. So that's like the goal of this summer, is to get like a real tan. But how about you?
A real tan. Yeah. Well, I lean, I'm Irish. I'm half Irish, half Italian. I lean more on the, lighter complexioned side. So I haven't gotten a spray tan in about 100 years. And I just, that's why I had to push it went long because I'm clearly a novice when I went to go get it done. And they tell you, don't sit down while it's supposed to dry. So I'm clearly making all the amateur moves here. But if I look extra tan on my trip, which I will maybe share later, just that's why. It's not real. It's fool's gold over here. We're just trying to look like we got some sun.
Yeah, that's what us Irish have to do. I'm about something like a fifth Irish and then mixed with German. So I hear you on the fighting off the pale side of our heritage.
Oh yeah, I cannot get the concept of me actually getting a real tan, while I can, because I'm also half Italian, I just, I know what that means for Irish people. It's like, I'm not over here trying to get extra sun and, extra freckles. So here we are, end of June. Lots to talk about despite it being the off season for the Rams. First and foremost, how are you doing? How is everything in your world? I've been seeing you, at OTAs, which wrapped up a while ago. We've got, I want to say, and by the way, I'm holding my hands like this. That's why. So just because I'm not really supposed to cause creases in my hand. But the Rams announced training camp dates at LMU, July 27th through August 6th, third consecutive year at LMU. You were there last year, right? Or did you get the job right after? Oh, so this will be your first
time. I came in week 1. So I covered Colts training camp last year. So that's been my life the last 3 or 4 years. And so excited to see what it's like to see a Rams training camp and get out to Loyola Marymount and see what that whole deal is like. And, it's going to be quite a camp to cover for this team when you think about, everyone they added, everyone that they, might still add. We'll be on Aaron Donald watch, I'm sure, at that time, unless something were to happen before then. And so maybe we're on left tackle watch. Who knows? It's going to be one of those interesting camps, also because you can tell that the Rams they do so little in the off season. I think we were out there for 3 practices, open practices, and Stafford was there for one of them. Myles Garrett was there for one of them, and they just kind of get through the offseason is the vibe that I've gotten here compared to some other teams I've covered in the past that put a little bit more into this time of year. But training camps, once the pads come on and all that fun stuff, that's when the coaches get fired up and we start to learn some things, and we'll get to see Ty Simpson really throw in competitive settings for the first time, and all these other storylines will finally, come together that we've been waiting to see.
Yeah, there are a ton of storylines that I think Rams fans are very curious, about heading into training camp. For you, Nate, which I know this will be your first one, and I'll fill you in on the training camp last year, but what would someone like you be looking for? I mean, I know you mentioned the rookie. What are you going to be looking for heading into training camp?
Yeah, I think rookies and newcomers, those are usually kind of what I have my eye on, just to get a sense of kind of how they fit into the position that they're joining, the ways that these teams want to use them. Training camps, it's interesting because it's like you just have to watch it accumulate over time. You get in this danger of reading into any single day, and you have to remember that this is still practice. This is still experimental. It's kicking off rust for a lot of guys. It's learning playbooks for a lot of the younger players. And so, sometimes there's things that happen in training camp that are very relevant. There's some things that happen that you never really see or think about again. You just kind of have to watch it play out to see if things are happening consistently or are they one-offs. I've had years where, I thought there's always like a breakout star in training camp that you don't tend to really see again in the regular season once things are different and, they're actually facing other defenses and actual game settings like that and stakes and whatnot. But there was one year that, I was covering a Colts team that was, had maybe some dark horse Super Bowl appeal back in 2022. And we get out there and you just, after so many practices, you just saw like this offense was an absolute disaster, and that absolutely played out. So sometimes it looks like that, but, there have been years when I was covering the Lions with Matthew Stafford that, their offense maybe didn't look so good in training camp and then they'd turn it on in the regular season. And so I think this one's going to be, you have to take everything in perspective because I don't think we're going to see a ton of Matthew Stafford in training camp, at least not consistently. I think it will be a time to let Ty Simpson step in a little bit more and get to face some live bullets. But, it'll be fun to see Trent McDuffie out there and Myles Garrett out there. And, the most fun thing to watch in training camp for me is the one-on-one battles for either the offensive line versus the defensive line or wide receivers against DBs. And just to watch Myles Garrett get after it in some of those settings, those one-on-one settings that already favor the pass rush, that's when you're going to kind of step back and realize like you're watching a few of the all-time greats out here in Myles Garrett. And obviously when Stafford's out there and maybe Puka's on his way to that, it is a moment that you got to get up close and you kind of appreciate the athleticism for what it is.
Do we see Aaron Donald return this season?
That's the big question. I think it's more likely than not at this point. It's
more likely than not. Okay, Adam Schefter, that's what he said. Yeah. Okay, but what's giving you that sort of inclination?
It's mostly the fact that like it just feels like one of those situations where there's smoke, there's fire. It's that rumbling came out as soon as the Myles Garrett trade went through, and Aaron Donald, who now works in media spaces, if he was just 100% dead set against it, didn't want that to be out there to build the hope in his former teammates,
right?
To put it out. The fact that I think when we got out there a few weeks ago and you had Rams players and coaches basically campaigning through the media to get Aaron Donald to consider coming back, that told me that there's at least a realistic chance of this because, a lot of them still talk to Aaron. He still visits the facility here and again. Sean McVay said he talked to Aaron about adding Myles Garrett. Like they had a lot of opportunities where Aaron could have let them know, like, this is just flat out not happening. And it just feels like there's a lot of noise and nobody really putting out the noise. And so I say more likely than not, though, because I just think it's a hard thing to truly pinpoint on whether it's going to happen until we get into the fall or at least into training camp, because I think it's quite possible that Aaron doesn't know the answer to that yet. If he's interested in it and he's trying to work himself back, he has to see how that's going to go, and he's been training like, an all-world athlete in the weight room ever since he retired. But there is something different to getting in, actual running shape, game shape, all that kind of stuff. And then thinking through how this is going to look. There's a lot of things to iron out as far as, what kind of a contract is he going to be on if he decides to come back? What does the role look like? What does he want it to look like? On one hand, it seems like if he's going to come back in his mid-30s, you'd want a reduced role and, save him for pass rushing downs and keep him away from some of those double teams that led to him wanting to retire. But you also have an all-time competitor that, from what I understand, having not covered him, but watching him and talking to everyone who's here who was around him, he never wanted to leave the field. So does he even want necessarily a very reduced role, or is he a guy that he's either all in or he's retired? I don't know. Also, when does he want to do it? If he does he?
Yep.
I have a hard time seeing him want to go through a training camp, because I don't think any player willingly wants to go through a training camp. But does he need that time to build back up in conditioning? Or does he maybe look at it and say, I don't really think I have a 17-game season in me at this age, but I could maybe come back halfway through the year, trade deadline. I don't know. It was all Quentin Lake, I thought, laid it out well, talking through all this of how many different kind of kinks there are to work out to make this happen. But to me, the fact that, the easiest thing right now would just be for Erin to come out and say, look, guys, I love what you're doing, but I'm more than happy doing what I'm doing, and I'm not retired, and I'm not coming out of retirement, because that's what he said when he visited the facility last fall, and I asked him, and that's what he's not so far come out and said yet. And so it just seems like it's definitely something that he's thinking about, experimenting with, that the Rams are hopeful on, more hopeful than they've been on in past years. I mean, I remember asking people around the facility about it, middle of last season. There was a little bit of more like social media hope and wonder about, could he do this? And, it wasn't realistic then. And it feels at least like something that could possibly happen now.
This is why Nate Atkins of The Athletic is amazing, because you're absolutely right. I totally picked up on that same sentiment, which was, you heard Adam Schefter, he's not going to drop a nugget and get the whole entire LA fan base excited for a potential return if there wasn't something potentially brewing. And if this is the year Aaron Donald ever comes out of retirement, it's got to be this year, because he's 35. The last time he's played, I want to say it was the Detroit loss in the postseason in January of 2024. So, even though he is in incredible shape, and even Jared Verse during training camp last year said when he endured a workout for his wife to call the police because Aaron Donald put him through such a strenuous workout, I think the longer he stays out, the longer it just would obviously take for him to get back into game shape, because game shape is different than locker room lifting, gym lifting weights shape. So that's a very good tell. And I think the other thing is, when we were at OTAs, we talked to Kobe Turner, and Kobe Turner also was kind of, not everyone said the right thing. We want him back if he wants to come back. And I think, to me, it's all just sort of indicating Aaron Donald is thinking about it. And I think we'll see, but that's a great point. Will it be training camp? Do a few more things need to sort of get ironed out before we actually see an Aaron Donald return? Either way, Rams fans would absolutely lose their mind. And offensive linemen and opposing quarterbacks may just decide to retire a little bit early, so they don't have to face both Myles Garrett and Aaron Donald. It's fun to talk about. Okay, so gosh, I feel like you gave us a lot. Well, so last year's training camp, the other part that was interesting, since you weren't there, Stafford was not playing, participating, getting involved, but it wasn't due to them wanting to kind of give him some rest. It was due to what ended up being revealed, an aggravated disc. So, I agree with you. It'll be really interesting to see his involvement and how much he'll be involved during training camp, what we're going to see out of Ty Simpson, who the clear-cut backup is. Do you feel like it at this point right now? Because you posted something on social that you didn't think there was really a clear-cut number 2 between him and Stetson.
No, I think that's going to be a big competition in camp, is to see those two get after it. That was the way Sean McVay laid it out the night that they picked Ty. At the time, just said it was going to be a competition between Ty Simpson and Stetson Bennett. At the time, you wonder, is that just something a coach says, not to get a rookie's hopes up too early, or get him a little overconfident. But, as we got out there in OTAs, that's what it looked like. You know, there were 2 days that Stafford was not out there at all. So all the reps were going to Ty Simpson and Stetson Bennett, and it was a true rotation. And Stetson got kind of the first crack at it, and Ty after that. And, you know, those settings are hard to, you don't want to read too much into them because they're not designed to be great evaluations of quarterbacks without a live pass rush and a defense that's scheming anything. But neither guy, from what I saw in those 2 days without Stafford or the other day where they split with Stafford, I didn't see any separation between them in those settings. It didn't look like, you know, you have a mix of, you know, Stetson Bennett's been in the system for multiple years now. Ty Simpson has, you know, he's fighting an uphill battle of experience, having only played one season of college. Now he's an NFL rookie. You know, the idea of him is sort of the talent, the future, and the upside. And that's in training camp. I think we'll see a little bit more of the mobility of Ty Simpson and how that can play into who he is as a quarterback. But it'll be interesting to watch, though, because I feel like if they don't get clarity on that by halfway through training camp, maybe, you know, do they look to still sign a veteran? And is there a veteran that makes sense for them? Because this is a position they just value very, very highly, the backup spot. You know, it's because Sean McVay is a complex offense. He really likes trusting a veteran who can run it very seamlessly when Stafford's not out there, and also run it seamlessly for the second unit, which has a lot of younger players who are trying to catch up and learn the offense. You think like last year when Stafford was out for almost all of training camp, that was Jimmy Garoppolo stepping in. And then whenever Stafford's out there, you know, Jimmy goes to the second unit. So he ends up playing a lot with guys like Terrance Ferguson and Blake Corum. And that helps those young players catch up to speed on this offense so that they can build bigger roles in the second half of the season, as both of those players did. So not having that this year, at least not having the proven version of it, the Jimmy Garoppolo who started a bunch of games and playoff games, it does make you wonder. And they tried this offseason. They would have loved to have Jimmy Garoppolo back, but he was considering retirement. They went after Kirk Cousins, but he found a much bigger payday with the Raiders. There's been reporting out there about how they went after Joe Flacco. He decided to stay in Cincinnati. The chairs have kind of disappeared from these veterans who have playoff experience. Russell Wilson ended up retiring. Tyrod Taylor ended up signing somewhere. So I'm not sure if there is an option out there that would make sense. But
why did they not work the deal out with Jimmy?
He told them to start the offseason that he was considering retirement, and that as time went on, and the longer that, you know, he didn't decide to sign with them or elsewhere, it just became more likely that retirement was going to be where Jimmy was going to go with this. Now, he hasn't announced that officially. That isn't 100% the way it is. For all we know, I mean, Jimmy could be another guy that's, you know, maybe just a little over training camp at this point, but that is an important time for that role on this team. And so, you know, they were prepared to draft Ty Simpson even if they signed Jimmy, and that their idea was going to be that Ty would just learn behind two veteran quarterbacks. That was their dream. They don't have that set up this year, and so now they're trying to see, is Ty ready to be a backup, or is Stetson Bennett ready after a couple years in the system but not getting to see the field? Could he be ready for it? I don't know. We've got to see a lot more, but I do think that's one area where this roster has had a natural drop-off that doesn't seem significant on its surface, but it could be in training camp, and it certainly would be, you know, if Stafford ever had to miss time during the season. And when they've got questions at left tackle, it makes you think a little bit more about the backup quarterback too.
Here with Nate Atkins of The Athletic. He is the Rams insider. This is going to be his first full year with the Rams. He covered the Rams all of last year, except for he did not come to training camp. And I'm just so glad we've kept you busy with plenty of content, plenty of things to write about. We were obviously talking about Jimmy Garoppolo not coming back, hasn't announced his retirement, flirted a little bit with Arizona. And I really wonder if during training camp, the Rams see both of these quarterbacks in Stetson and Ty, then ultimately go, hey, we like what we're seeing. We feel good with these guys, or potentially, you know what, it might be time to look at another opportunity with a veteran. And that's why I asked, why would Jimmy retire when they know there is a possibility Stetson and Ty wouldn't necessarily be actual game day ready should the call end up happening? Hopefully not, but you just never know.
Yeah.
Another thing that got and has been discussed with regards to what fans are saying, because here on Believe in Rams, we really care about what fans have to say. And the concern was not a high priority for wide receiver 3. Let's just say that, right? Because after Puka and Devontae, the targets change, and on Stafford shared it on Chris Long's podcast that the Rams didn't run a single play out of 13 personnel the entirety of training camp. And then once the postseason hit, I want to say the usage of wide receiver 3 on the field 50% less than they were in the regular season. So to you, which means obviously we may see it more this season, they obviously drafted another tight end, Max Klare, in the second round in back-to-back years. Are we going to see do you think that the identity of the Rams offense is going to be different this season in terms of what we saw last year, and that carry through from more traditional 11 personnel into 12 and 13?
Yeah, for sure. If you think back a year ago when they're heading into last season, they had an offense that had always been 11 personnel under Sean McVay, 3 wide receivers and 1 running back. That was the plan again. That's why they paid $10 million to bring Tutu Atwell back, because they wanted him to be that speedy third receiver who could kind of take the top off of defense while Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams do all that they do, kind of a little bit more underneath and in the intermediate area. And they kind of fell into it last year. It was mid-season when they started to experiment with 2 and 3 tight end sets just a little bit, because they didn't like how some of their run game, some of their short yardage was working out. If you think back to the number.
Wait, that was before Puka went down?
Yeah, they first experimented with it just a little bit. It was a handful of plays right before Puka went down, because they wanted to find a little bit more for their run game and their short yardage. If you think about it, they got stuffed on a quarterback sneak against the Eagles. They got stuffed on 4th and 1 and lost against the 49ers. All of a sudden, they wanted to find a way to evolve beyond being this 11 personnel team that all of a sudden tried to just make it work in short yardage. So, 12 and 13 personnel, bringing in those extra bodies on the line to seal down the edges at the edge of the run game, they thought could help them. And it was just when Puka went down against the Ravens, they just started playing it more. And then they had some time on their hands that week. That's when they were in Baltimore practicing at the Orioles facility, and they're just staying in hotels, and they just kind of put all their brain power into, let's see if we can build this out a little bit more. And they had another week without Puka in London against the Jaguars, and the idea at the time was, let's run this, let's get through this week, let's get into our bye week, and we can get back to what we were doing. And it worked so well for that game. They scored 35. They won 35-7, and Stafford had 5 passing touchdowns. And all of a sudden, it unleashed Devontae Adams as the single receiver in the red zone. And they thought, gee, we may have really found something here. And so it became a way that they leaned into it because it was working well, but it was also letting them kind of load manage these receivers, where you think about, not only was Puka out, Devontae Adams had dealt with multiple lower body injuries. They wanted to get through this regular season with those 2 intact. And so playing, 1 wide receiver on the field rather than 3 was a way to do that. It worked so well that I totally expect them to keep that and lean into it. I think that's a huge reason why they didn't add the 3rd wide receiver. Many of us thought that they would this offseason, because they saw that it worked so well last year, and that they wanted to lean more into it. So they draft Max Klare in the 2nd round. They bring Tyler Higbee back on another deal. And I think they're looking
Yeah.
at this year as Terrance Ferguson's year to really take the leap and be maybe something of a hybrid between a tight end and a wide receiver three. If you look at Terrance last year, down the stretch of the year, he had 10 catches for 220 yards and 3 touchdowns over the final like 10 games, and he more or less was taking the role that Tutu Atwell had as far as those splash plays, those plays up the seam, the speed routes. They kind of found that in a tight end body in a lower volume role last year. This year, I think they want to lean more into that. And so Terrance Ferguson's the guy I look at is, we had to label a potential breakout for every team here at the Athletic. And I put Terrance Ferguson as the Rams because I think this year is setting up for him to lead the tight end room in catches and yards and touchdowns, but also potentially be third on the team in all of those categories behind Puka and Devontae. So he can end up being a version of wide receiver three and tight end number one if it all comes together. Obviously he has to stay healthy. He's got to grow a little bit more in the playbook, and he's been trying to add some weight in the offseason to be able to play more snaps and be able to not only be a 13 personnel tight end, but they've got enough tight ends. They've got enough belief in the 13 personnel movement that I think they're ready to set that up and see how much they can carry over. And it helps that, even though they lost an offensive coordinator in Mike LaFleur, who was a part of installing that, they promoted Nate Scheelhaase, who's to offensive coordinator. And he was a guy that worked a ton behind the scenes on scripting these plays and theorizing some of these packages. So I think he obviously has influence in this too. And so I don't think it's coincidence that they promote him and they're keeping the 13 personnel and not going back to the 3 wide receiver format. And I think it could be a smart move as long as those top 2 receivers stay healthy, because you still need 2 of them, even if you're not going to play in 11 personnel.
Right. Well, and if you think about it, guys, it kind of makes sense because like Terrance Ferguson, after this year, he's the essentially only for sure guy on the roster when it comes to tight ends, right? Because Colby, Davis, and Tyler Higbee has a 2-year deal. But if those 3 guys decide, don't get re-signed or Tyler wants to hang it up, then it leaves literally just Ferguson and a rookie tight end, which if you saw the development of Terrance Ferguson last season, it took him 5 weeks to even get targeted. So understanding the playbook, the NFL system, the complexity of Sean McVay's offense, it takes a minute to adapt to the pros and a Sean McVay team. So they really kind of need him, and maybe they are, and maybe, like you said, we'll see another sort of step above what we saw from Terrance Ferguson last season. But they did trust him because I can't remember if it was the Panther game or the Falcons game, but he basically missed a shot. And I think it was it could have been a touchdown. And then back-to-back plays right after he dropped that pass, they targeted him again and he made the catch. Do you remember what game that was? Was that the Falcons game? I mean, it was an important game, I remember, because it might have been the Panthers or the Falcons. I think it was the Falcons. But I was like, oh, wow, they trusted him. They doubled down and they trusted him. They went back to him and he delivered. And so Terrance Ferguson feels like the breakout potential you're talking about should everything develop the way that the Rams are hoping with him.
Yeah, I think by late last season, they built a good amount of trust in him to, run some of these seam stretching routes and get open. He's just so hard to cover for anybody at linebacker and a lot of safeties too. And so, they found something with the 13 personnel because not only do they put other blockers around Terrance, so he's not, as out there on an island or as the primary lead blocking tight end, but they force defenses to play heavier personnel too. They force them into base defense where they play 3 linebackers on the field. And so one of those guys has to match up with Terrance Ferguson, and it's hard to find many linebackers at all who have the athleticism to keep up with him in coverage. So what they're hoping to see out of Terrance this year is to grow in that and get a little bit more consistent and get open and just have better chemistry with Stafford, but also just be a little bit more physically ready to handle the blocking assignments, to be able to get through a season with a heavier workload and not wear down at all. I know you see Grady back there with this going on, making a little appearance in the background. But yeah, I think this is set up to be Terrance Ferguson's tight end room starting this year and carrying forward. And I think the idea of drafting Max Klare was understanding that they want to keep the 13 personnel movement beyond this year, and they need to get ahead of that, not only because of the guys that are going to be gone and they'll have multiple openings next year, but because we saw, like you mentioned, it took Terrance some time to even get to the level where they wanted to play him. And so there's a similar transition for Max Klare. And rather than wait to next year to have a rookie as their number 2 tight end going through that, they're going to get ahead on it, use this as Max Klare's learning year, and then next year hope that you've got Terrance Ferguson and Max Klare, these 2 good receiving tight ends, and see what they can do with them.
I mean, we didn't get through even half of what I wanted to talk to you, but it's I know it's time for us to wrap. So Nate Atkins of The Athletic, it was really great to chat with you and Grady. We appreciate your insight because I think we can speculate all we want about what the Rams offense is going to look like. Is Aaron Donald going to come back? What guys are going to return next season? But we just don't know. And until we start to see this offense and the Rams season really undergo, starting in Melbourne, it's hard. It's fun to talk about, needless to say. And the Rams do such a unique job at reinventing how things should go in the NFL, right? They don't go to the combine. They have, I almost thought that there were 2 offensive coordinators right now, but obviously that's not the case. But they bring in Cliff Kingsbury. So that throws in potentially a new wrinkle when it comes to a Sean McVay offense. And then, questions at what might happen with the left tackle position. We haven't even seen Jarquez Hunter yet. Is Blake Corum going to be another potential breakout candidate this season? Lots to discuss, which I love. So we're going to leave the audience wanting more. Guys, thank you for listening. Follow Nate on social. His Twitter game is next level. Nate Atkins. He's with The Athletic. He's amazing. And lets me ask him questions about Rams football and spray tans, which is really, I appreciate that.
I know a little bit more about one of those than the other, but maybe I'll try some spray tan and see the worst for me.
Yeah, get out there. I mean, part of that California sun glow. It's not real, but it does make your teeth whiter, and you don't have to get sunburned. So that's nice for us Irish folk who tend to burn. So, all right, folks, thank you guys for listening and watching and tuning in. Leave a comment, a review. What do you want to talk? What do you want to hear about? We'll try to get Nate back on very shortly, but for now, we really appreciate it. Thanks, Nate.
Thanks for having me as always.